Good morning, folks. I'm Tom McLaughlin. This is my friend Jim Wilfong sitting in the left chair, and Jim is a former state rep in Maine and trade person, small business person with 3 administrations in Washington, and businessman, and so yeah, we got again a lot to talk about. It's Wednesday, December 4th.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're.
How you doing?
I'm pretty good for, as I say to some people, an old white guy, and it's because people look at me. Some people laugh. You know, to be an old white guy is to be blamed for everything that's gone wrong in the last several centuries, according to modern political analysis on campus. So
yes,
I have to qualify that.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. So how good can an old white guy get? Given that. So here's question number 1 from our producer. And let's see. The White House declared Sunday it would not participate in the first impeachment hearings before the House Judiciary Committee. Would you have liked to hear any White House testimony?
Sure.
You would have.
I always interested in hearing whatever. And, they're co-equal branches of government, and it does seem to me that Congress has this responsibility granted to them under the Constitution, and, you got to play by the rules. We're a rules-based society. I don't know if it would reveal anymore, but it's the way it works. So,
I would like to have thought that it's due process would have been involved in this, the way it is in courts, and so, basic rights would have been given to the defendant in this case, which would be the president, but that hasn't been the case, and I think that's the basis for Trump's refusal, at least according to his attorney, Cipollone, I think his name is, was, this is, you have secret hearings. The minority, in this case the Republicans, don't have a right to call witnesses, can't even ask certain questions, unless the chairman, Adam Schiff, that's in the Intelligence Committee, which is where it originated. Now it's in Judiciary, but this looks like similar rules are applying. And so given that you can't put on a defense the way you would, in courtroom scenes that most people would be familiar with, that's the basis for refusing, and I understand that. So now, if the Democrats can come up with enough votes for impeachment, which looks like they can at this point, then it'll go over to the Senate controlled by Republicans and they'll make rules that, will hopefully will be fair. But will they be partisan so we back at you to the, majority Democrats in the House? That remains to be seen. But as we were saying before the show, we were convincing with the producer that, people are not really that interested in this impeachment thing, or if they are interested, they already know what they think, and what is revealed in these hearings is not likely to change their mind for, pro or con regarding impeachment, and that it's getting boring. So the
American population is easily bored. I think people in general are easily bored today. We have so much information that we can get, and I do have to say that My general inclination is always to be fair. But, the Constitution set this thing up not as a judicial process, quasi at best. And it's more of a political process than it is a judicial process, Tom. And you would know probably better than I, because your history has been what you've been teaching all these years. But it is set up not as, it's not set up the same way with a grand jury and then a jury of your peers and all of that, because they're not bringing in a jury of your peers. It's going to be political, depending on who controls what body, and only under the best of circumstances, which is why when John Kennedy wrote the Profiles in Courage, Edmund G. Ross, a U.S. Senator from Kansas, voted against the impeachment, even though he was a Republican. He wasn't necessarily what they called a radical Republican, and he voted against the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. And that was his last term in the United States Senate. And
against removing him from office.
Against
He'd
removing
already
him
been
from
impeached,
office.
yeah.
He'd already been impeached, but he didn't
Yeah,
remove him from
yeah.
office.
And that's something that most people, I find, still don't understand. To be impeached is not to be removed.
Correct.
It's the first step.
It's the first step.
It's like being indicted. It's almost synonymous with an indictment.
Yes.
Or a charge.
Yes.
A formal charge.
And it's hard to call any such process judicial, because it really isn't. You don't really have an impartial judge, hopefully, and you don't have a jury of your peers making the decision.
Correct, you don't. And also, the rules are made on the fly almost. It's what were the rules? I mean, the Constitution, if you read, does not go into a lot of text when it comes to impeachment.
Well, it doesn't go into, it says that the House and the Senate decide their own rules.
They do.
Of order. They decide their own rules. I think they're operating still, quite frankly. I mean, you could check this, but I think they're still operating on the impeachment rules that were created by Newt Gingrich's Congress during Clinton's impeachment.
In the House.
In the House. I believe so. Yeah. So, I don't know. It's as they say, as Harry Truman said, politics, it ain't beanbag.
Right. Yeah, that was Truman, huh?
Uh-huh.
He was good.
He was good.
Yeah, I read 3 biographies of him.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Didn't Douglas Brinkley write a biography of Harry
That's
Truman?
not one of the ones
That's
I
not
wrote.
the one, yeah.
I read, Merle Miller wrote one called Plain Speaking.
Oh, really?
It was my favorite.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Merle Miller, huh?
And David McCullough wrote
Oh,
one.
yes, David
More
McCullough.
recently. That was the last one I read. I can't remember what the first one was. But, yeah, he interests me. Truman does.
He's an interesting character.
Yeah, ordinary guy.
Ordinary guy.
Never been to college.
I know.
And,
He and I have something in common.
And he didn't have to unlearn any baloney in order to
Yes, he
learn and he learned. He was in business. He didn't do well at it, but he was in business. A haberdashery went bankrupt.
Yeah.
And then he did go bankrupt formally, which meant that he wasn't obligated to pay off his debtors, but he did anyway over time. I think it took him more than 10 years.
Yeah.
But he did, in small increments, pay everybody off just as a matter of honor.
Yeah.
Which is what he had.
Right.
And
He did have honor.
yeah,
That's important.
yeah, and he was a artillery captain.
I know.
World War I. And he realized at that point, so did others, that he could lead men in battle. And that, but he kind of fell into politics, but he was associated with some corrupt politicians.
So,
out there in Missouri.
Weren't they
The
bootleggers?
Pendergasts.
The Pendergast bunch.
Yeah.
I'll tell you an interesting story. So I work for a wealthy family that was out in Kansas City, which is where
Nearby.
the Pendergast boys were.
Oh.
And they owned 150, 200 acres in Kansas City's limits, up on a hill, and this house belonged to the Pendergasts. And it belonged to them that they bought, and they had a fire pit out back where they did barbecues for Harry Truman to do fundraising, and I had a barbecue from a barbecue dinner
on
one
that
night.
site, huh?
On that site, but they had down in the basement is where they had, they stored the basement of the house. So it was just interesting. It was.
Well, that's an Irish name, Pendergast, so
Yes.
I assume it was an Irish mob and organized crime, and there were many counterparts all around the country in urban areas, most notably Chicago, but also Boston and New York and Tammany Hall, et cetera.
Sure.
Well, wasn't all Irish then, but
No.
Anyway, it's and being of Irish extraction. From my folks come from Charlestown, which is run pretty much by the Irish mob. The best depiction I've seen of that culture, let's say, would be, what was it? Mystic River Bridge. I don't know. There's a movie. And the book was by Dennis Lehane.
Yeah,
operates out of South Boston, but
that was a good movie.
It really was, and even though it was done in the '80s.
Yeah.
And my experience in that area was earlier '50s and '60s. The ethic and the way people interacted, and there were rules, and they went by. They were gangsters, and they were killers.
Yes.
And they ran rackets, but there were rules, and there was a sense of honor, you might say, in that. Can I trust you? Are you going to do what you say? Are you going to follow through?
And always
and the penalty for not doing so was often boom.
Was steep.
2 in the hat.
Yeah.
So it was steep.
Well, it's those types of rules I found in business, around the world, and that it's really hard when you're trying to promote trade between small businesses. It's really difficult because you can't afford to do the types of contracts that you would do if you were a big company. They would lay out all the rules, because I was working with several different companies, and those companies weren't necessarily all from the same state. So then you had the rules of Colorado, the rules of New Hampshire, the rules of whatever, and the rules of, let's say, Spain. And so to figure out all those rules was really cost prohibitive.
Arrive at an agreement that satisfied all of them.
You had to build trust. You had to say, do I trust this person? I'm going to buy goods that come halfway around the world. Is this a person that I can trust?
Really, it comes down to that in so many areas, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
You can have yourself a contract, and you can hire the best attorneys to draw it up, and that helps.
It helps.
But ultimately, I'm involved in some very small business exploits in level, and everything is by word. And trust is the primary currency.
Trust is it.
And if that's not there, we can't do business.
Right. And we could do business, financially, we could do business by having irrevocable letters of credit, international letters of credit. We could do that. But if you're waiting for 6 or 7 months before the goods are going to be shipped, and you're out promoting the product, and you've got money and skin in the game already before you get the goods.
Yeah.
Can you trust that we're going to produce the goods and we're going to ship the goods to you on time?
Yeah.
And can we trust that you will, after we have chosen you as a distributor, that you will in fact be able to post an irrevocable international letter of credit? It takes trust.
Well, how much trust is eroding now in this whole impeachment thing in government and media. And I remember I was at a symposium. The Press Herald put it on, and it was rented a hall in Portland somewhere, I forget. And the editor of the Globe was there to talk about. This was just the beginning of the Trump administration, and they were talking about media and can we trust media and how reliable is media. And I'll think of the name of the guy. I think he's still there in the Globe, editor. Tom something. Tom, Irish name. Anyway.
Yeah.
He was talking about how trustworthy he said we are. Now, I come from the Boston area, and I read the Globe most of my life. And I said, and of course he's on Trump already, and the audience was, anytime he slammed Trump, this was very early, it was early in 2017, and the audience would, they'd react the way you would, it's almost like the audience in The View, automatic applause.
Oh, gee.
And so I got up and I went the other way, and I said, well, it was Jimmy Carter had recently said that he is astonished at how much negative press Donald Trump is getting. He just, that he thought wasn't warranted, at least that early on in the thing. And also that there were fewer I mean, people don't trust used car salesmen. Congress was second to them, even beneath them, and the media was beneath Congress. I said in national polls, and how much did they trust media? And so they didn't like what I had to say. So.
Well, as you know, I mean, I think we may have talked about it one time on a previous show. 1800, they didn't trust media either, and you couldn't. And I think that even though we may not trust media, I don't hold so much out for media being the end all for me. I figure the founders knew that we had to take some responsibility upon ourselves to sort things out.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and even under the best of circumstances, under the very best of circumstances, the editor, if they want to be, if that person wants to be really, present an honest and balanced approach to it, still, where they place the story, is it above the fold on the front page? Is
Page 29.
Page 29.
Yeah.
Is it? I mean, all of us have prejudice in us, and we, even if we're trying to write a straight story, it may not be, and so
Right.
so
That's
it
right.
really leaves it up to the reader to
First the editor,
sort it
then
out.
the reader.
Then
You're
the
right
reader.
to include the editor.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. So the reader and the editor is one person, but we are many, and it's why we have to have. It's the number one reason, in my opinion, that we have an education, is so that we can be good citizens.
You're right. I
And-
mean, yes, I would tend to agree.
I mean, yeah, we have to make being a good citizen means pulling your weight and earning a living, no doubt. That's important. But the real reason, the only reason we can go out and earn a living is that we have a democratic society.
We're not. Anarchy is not one of our values.
No.
And so we realize that we need a government, and as some have said, the first being who's the guy from Concord that wrote Walden Pond.
Oh, yeah.
First one, you'll think of his name. You know who I mean.
Thoreau.
Yeah, Henry Thoreau said that that government is best that governs least.
Mm-hmm.
Some say he got it from Jefferson, but that's not for sure.
No.
But I agree with that. And so that was, I think, the ethic of our founders. Make it as small as possible. And the Constitution they wrote, it creates a government, but it's primarily limiting that government. Most of the wording in there says you may do this and not that. You know,
Yes.
and then the 9th and 10th Amendments, would say anything we didn't mention in here, any powers that we may have overlooked, those rest with the states
Retained by the
or with the
people.
people.
Right.
And and only what we have specified, these powers that are delegated in Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, that's it. There's no more. And that's kind of been sanded down to.
Well, it
almost
started being sanded down by one of the founders, Marshall.
Okay.
Marshall. For one, I mean, he
was a Supreme Court justice.
He was a
Yeah.
Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he started right from the beginning.
And what would you cite as an example?
Well,
of
I
that?
can cite an example. I once read, I know you're going to find this crazy, but I once read over 200
Now,
pages.
we're in the early 1800s. Here,
We're-
just to
we're
set.
talking
Okay,
about-
early in the Republic.
Early in the Republic, 1816, 1817, I read over 200 pages of debate on a particular subject, which was I had a dozen ancestors. You're from Irish descent. I'm from Yankee descent, and I had a dozen ancestors who were in the Revolution. 3 of them were killed at Concord Bridge. And so I'm always very interesting. I feel a responsibility to those ancestors. So so I try to pay attention. It's not...
So Marshall, what was the debate?
The debate was about whether or not they would give a pension to revolutionary soldiers.
All right.
Okay? And it was...
I see why you didn't be interested given your ancestry.
Yeah, and so I was interested in how they came out, and it was really interesting. And it was as political as you might think, but it was really interesting. The ones who were opposed to having any pension for
But they were
these,
promised, right?
they were
The
promised
soldiers were
promised
but the
a pension.
states were responsible. Is that not true?
No, not necessarily true. Maybe, but the states didn't have any money, and they weren't about to do it, and it was viewed as a national thing.
All right.
And so, at any rate, there was this big debate, and basically the South was against it. But then as you dig into it and you get further into it, you find that for every one Southern soldier in the Revolution, there were 4 from New England. And so the South, with the import taxes that were going on tobacco and cotton and export tax going out,
That was the revenue in the country
That was
at
the
the time,
revenue
yeah,
at the
yeah.
time for
No
the
income tax. That was tariffs.
That was
Yeah.
it was all in tariffs.
Yeah.
And so their view was they were going to pay more out to New England soldiers because there were more of them.
Interesting.
And so, but finally, it got passed after enough had died, which is the normal procedure,
Not
unfortunately.
that many left to pay off.
Not so many left to pay off, and they finally did it, but not for the Minutemen and militias, only for those who
Continental
served in
Army?
the Continental Army. Later in the 1830s, they started paying what were left of the militia.
Widows and the orphans.
Yeah, it was later, and but the interesting thing is that they had a ruling that Marshall was involved in, and the ruling was that they were allowed to provide a pension, not to just specific individuals, but as groups of people, and that decision by Marshall became, as I understand it, that became the entire legal basis for veterans' pensions and other entitlements across the board. It goes back to that decision. So it was made early.
For government employees.
No, not for hiring government employees, but
for soldiers.
but for soldiers, but for Social Security or.
Okay, set the precedent for that.
It set the
which
precedent
came
for that.
100 plus years later.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's, early time, things were being sorted out still.
We're still doing it.
Americans seem to, they like to have political arguments. I think the problem, which I don't think is bad, I think the problem becomes when it becomes really divisive, and it seems to be very divisive, perhaps as divisive as it's been since 1858, and I think that's too bad.
Sitting in your chair, and we've had Bill Marvel to discuss exactly that.
Oh.
Bill Marvel is I think,
I know Bill
Civil
Marvel.
War historian.
Yes, he
and
is.
So, and this was, I think, 2 years ago. When I was concerned about polarization in the country, and I asked him, how closely does this compare to 1858, 1860, when violence broke out, and do you see a possibility of an armed conflict? And he said yes to the first question, which was, yeah, I do see parallels. I do see the divisions in the country as being nearly as strong as they were then. But as to the possibility of armed conflict, he said, no, geography precludes it, because you had the South was a contiguous states, all seceded.
Yes.
And that isn't true now, unless you were to say, well, okay, if you look at the red-blue map of the United States, I mean, the coasts and a few places around, in Illinois and Chicago and down the Southwest where the Indian reservations are all red, and the blue, the blue is along urban areas, and so that seems to be the divide. And it's true in Maine as well. I mean, you got, the Portland area is urban,
right,
and it's it's very, very much to the left. Whereas the rest of Maine, Oxford County, where we live, went for Trump.
Right.
So it's that urban-rural divide seems to be where we're at.
Well,
now.
I think the divide comes along the two Maines or the two Americas, and
right.
it divides along. A lot of it divides right along poverty levels and socioeconomic levels, where if you're not doing well in this economy, and there are a whole lot of reasons why you might not be doing well, that it's that it causes a lot of discontent, and people don't feel that it's a level playing field, and that makes it tough.
It does.
It makes it tough because my view, you want government involved in antitrust issues, but you don't want government really in deciding how the economic system is exactly going to work on a day-to-day basis. You want business people making those decisions.
Mostly, and then if it gets out of hand, then you want to regulate through antitrust.
Yes, if it's out of hand, then you need to do something.
But we need to, allow for individual initiative and small business, and that's what you did. You were a small business consultant
in running my own my own businesses. Yeah. So I get that, and I support that.
One thing you said in this conversation was that there were 4 times as many soldiers from New England from the Revolution as there were from the South.
Yes.
I think that's reversed now. In this volunteer military we have, most of them tend to be from southern states.
Or rural poor areas.
Yes.
I think that's the determining factor. It's rural poor areas. That, if you go up to Van Buren, Maine, I was up there, I haven't been up there for 7 or 8 years, but Main Street is empty except for Armed Forces recruiting station.
Really?
The last time I was there. And that's what you find in Machias, Armed Forces recruiting stations.
Machias being the poorest county in Maine.
Machias being in Washington County, yes, that's correct.
Yeah, right, Washington County.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so, you find that people who come from poor situations, they see an opportunity to be in the military.
Remember John Kerry? What did he say about you got to go to college, you got to educate yourself, or you're going to end up in Iraq. Remember when he was running for president? He said that, and it kind of went back to you got to develop your mind, and then military guys, especially career military guys, really took issue with that. But anyway, let's do the number 2.
Okay.
Here we are taking our initiative, Mr. Producer. This never happens. President Trump suddenly announced his departure from NATO meetings after world leaders were caught mocking him on camera. Do you think the president is reacting to the video? And if so, is he justified in leaving, or is he being childish?
When did this happen?
I just saw
today?
it as a headline on the Drudge Report this morning.
Oh.
I didn't, there was a photograph of Macron, and who else did I recognize? I didn't see Johnson in there. Oh, but did I? I guess I did. Boris Johnson, Macron, and I don't know, the others I didn't recognize.
There are 27 countries, I think.
Right, but there were about 5 or 6 people in this photograph, and they're, kind of like, their body language indicates that they're sharing a joke, and then it said Trump, ridiculing Trump. But I didn't read the story. I didn't click on it.
I don't know.
Obviously, our producer did. Well, do you think the president is reacting to the video? Well, I haven't seen the video. I only saw a still photograph. But is he justified in leaving, or is he being childish? Suddenly announced his departure. I didn't know he announced his departure.
Well, you know what?
You mean he's going back to the United States and not settling this?
My own view is this: people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And if you're going to dish it out, and he dishes it out,
he does
on a regular basis, including over there.
Yes.
If you're going to dish it out, you got to be able to take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's no more complicated for me than that. And then if you put it in the area of the this is our national security. We can't afford to have people who are thin-skinned about what others in the world are saying about you. We have permanent interests that we always have to look out for.
We do.
No matter what.
We do.
Period.
I heard. Now I was listening to Hugh Hewitt, who is a conservative radio talk show host nationwide, on the way in here. He's an attorney, worked in Washington for a long time in the Justice Department. And he was saying that Trump was chastising, I think, Macron.
Yes, I did hear
because
that.
he didn't reach the 2% threshold of GDP.
No, not so much on that, I don't think, Tom, as much as Macron himself said that he thought something like this, that NATO had become brain dead.
Macron said that.
Yes, and Trump took objection to that.
I wonder what he meant by that.
I don't know exactly what he meant by that, but that's what he had said. And let's not forget that Trump has been pretty hard, not just on the 2%, but Trump, I think in general, either didn't understand, didn't like it, or whatever, what NATO was doing, because you have to act within a group of 27. I mean, it's like being married, right? I mean, we don't just do what we'd like to do unless we wouldn't like to be married anymore to your wife or my wife, I can tell you.
Yeah.
And I do think that when you become a public official, this is what I think, across the board, when you become a public official, you have responsibilities and standards that you have to live to no matter what. It just comes with the turf. And, they don't have the luxury to be able to say, well, I'm not going to do that.
And the United States is the preeminent military force in the world, has been since World War II, except for a period during which the Cold War was being waged, when Russia rivaled us.
Somewhat.
And now, though, war's changed.
War has changed.
And we're not going to see a World War II type
One hopes
conflict.
not.
We hope not, and certainly not with China or anybody like that.
Yeah.
But they're probably going to be the kind that we're seeing in the Middle East and
Proxy
guerrilla type.
wars.
Proxy wars, yeah.
Proxy
that's
wars.
Right.
That's what we see.
And it's NATO. Where does NATO fit in on that? How does it? Well, we can't. NATO is a value. We have to preserve it. We have to work.
It is a value,
right? And we have to compromise. We can't go it alone.
No.
In anywhere really.
No.
And it's,
we
may
can't
think sometimes that we can, but not a good idea.
Well, and not a good idea because, quite frankly, big armies, a lot of weaponry. If you talk to people in the military, talk to people at the Pentagon, that's not the first thing they think we should be employing. They think we should be employing diplomacy. And they don't think that there's a military solution to all of it, that you find a diplomatic solution backed up by a strong military.
And in between, the diplomatic solution was caught up with economic sanctions and such.
Sure.
That seems to be a big weapon nowadays.
It's a big weapon.
We're using it against the Soviet Union, against North Korea, we're using it against Iran, and we're using it against, did I say the Soviet? Yeah, I meant Russia.
You meant Russia, yes.
And and Iran is really feeling the squeeze, and it looks like it's. And I would favor that kind of an approach for leverage before you get to the military. So diplomacy, then economic sanctions, then military.
If you have to.
Yes.
And if Teddy Roosevelt had it right.
Yeah.
Walk softly, speak softly.
That's out there. It's on the table.
It's on the table, but we're not going to employ it unless we absolutely have to.
Right.
And that's the way it should be because, if we got into any sort of a really big war, the United States isn't going to be home free. The oceans aren't going to protect us anymore.
No.
And it's going to be missiles that are coming from somewhere. And it's, so if we really want to make sure that we have if we're looking at our security, then we have to look at it through a lot of different lenses and not just a military lens.
We do.
We have to look at it through an economic lens.
Speaking of which, I saw something this morning again on it was on Drudge, another headline on Drudge, just before it changed to this one.
Uh-huh.
No, it was further down the story. It wasn't a headline. And it was a new biography of Epstein.
Ooh.
And this was interesting. So I read the first story, and I read some of the second. So there was this story, and then it'll have several links below it that are related. So I read the first thoroughly, and it's somebody who, it's a group of about 4 or 5 writers, none of whom did I recognize, but had written other biographies that did well.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a tell-all kind of thing, and it said they'd been researching Epstein for about 5 years prior to, it only came up again in the news in just July. It was only a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then, he's back in jail, and then, he suicide, well, was it? I don't know. But here's some of the things that came out in this. The biggest one that surprised me, it raised my eyebrows, was it made the claim that Epstein was an agent of the Israeli intelligence Mossad, had a handler who handled Epstein. That was a major, whoa. I never expected that.
Whoa.
Yeah. And
that's interesting.
Yes. Now, if it's true, and it looks like, well, also that the connections between the relationship between Epstein and Clinton and between Epstein and Trump were much more extensive than either Clinton or Trump has admitted. Mm-hmm. Now, it brought in some familiar stuff, which, like people like, what's his name, the Harvard attorney that defended O.J. Simpson.
Oh.
You know who I mean.
Dershowitz.
Alan Dershowitz. His name has been associated for the last couple of years, I've seen. Mm-hmm. He was interviewed in the book, so I'll be interested to see that.
Well, it would be interesting to know,
because he was Epstein's attorney, part of Epstein's attorney's team. Let me
just say, nothing would surprise me about that guy.
Yeah.
And nothing would surprise me about powerful people being involved with somebody who has a lot of money and perceived power as a result of the money. And nothing would surprise me. And quite frankly, so I'd like to see, who the authors of the book are, just to see. And I always, Merrill D. Peterson was one of my guys for Jefferson. He taught history at University of Virginia, and he's one where I go and I say, there's a really great authority. So I like to know who the authors are, but nothing would surprise me about this guy, and nothing would surprise me about having powerful people, politically powerful people, and also economically powerful.
Another one
people.
Involved was Adnan Khashoggi, who was a Saudi arms dealer, died 2 years ago.
Yes, I remember him.
Billionaire.
Uh-huh. Oh, really?
Yeah,
interesting.
He was involved. That was another name I hadn't seen before in this context. But and a few other facts that don't come to mind right now. I read it quickly just before I went out the door. But that's going to be interesting.
You see, this goes back.
There was one more thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Blackmail. The Mossad
of course.
was using it to blackmail certain people. That
just what I was just thinking.
What better way than
Just what I was just thinking. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of similarities to this whole thing in other situations as well, mm-hmm. and it goes back to show you, including ourselves. I mean, we're out there playing the same game that Mossad is playing, but we can't assume just because they happen to be an ally that they aren't pursuing their interests as well. Even though we would like to think they weren't manipulating us, but in today's world, anything goes, and we have to understand manipulation can be going on
all
from
is fair
a lot of places.
Love and war.
Yes, exactly.
And Israel is in a constant state of war, mm-hmm. and they have the mindset of someone who is hyper vigilant,
right?
And they have to be.
I understand.
And I visited there about 10 years ago, and it was You'd see it. I mean, everyone's in the military, right? Male and female.
I know.
You're
Yeah,
in the IDF
right.
for a while, and then up until age 60 or something, you're in the reserves. Can be called up at any time. So I in Jerusalem especially, I noticed walking around there that that automatic weapons were everywhere.
Sure.
And I'd see women who looked like they were 15 with an AK-47, an M16
Yeah.
over their shoulder, and the barrel would almost be dragging on the ground. That's how small these women were.
Right.
Or a guy with pushing along a stroller with a baby in it, and then toddlers are holding it on either side, and he's got an AK-47 over his shoulder.
Yeah.
And that's what ordinary, just
I know.
walking outside my hotel, walking at home. Okay.
It's not a way we'd like to live.
It isn't, but that's how they live.
I understand.
And
I
their
get
intelligence.
I understand.
They have to have intelligence. We rely on their intelligence about what's going on in the Middle East.
it. In the Middle East, yes.
Yeah, because they're the go-to people.
Well, this
when it
is the
comes to
reason
that.
we rely on those 27 countries that are members of NATO.
So when he makes this comment about
You know.
it being brain dead, that intrigues me. I wonder
Yeah,
what Macron meant by that.
I don't know, but I could maybe
Well,
take a
I'll-
guess.
I'm gonna check it out someday,
I could take a guess. That it's been operating under what was a Cold War strategy for all these years.
Okay, yeah.
Which
Yeah.
you could see, and a post-Cold
Things
War.
have changed.
Things have changed, and maybe what he's saying, maybe he didn't choose exactly the right words, but maybe he's not all wrong. That we ought to take a second look and see how we improve it to meet the problems of today. And we face these non-state actors who are out there. They can act from anywhere in the world because of technological improvements that have been made. And
September 11th.
September 11th is a good
Cost
example.
them about $200,000 to do what they did.
Sure. And how else do you take on the world's largest military power?
You don't.
Other than by
Backdoor.
Backdoor. You don't take them on head on.
No.
That's not going to work.
And that's the same thing that's happening with Israel.
Sure.
Because 48, all the Arab countries around
Right.
them invaded.
Right.
Got thrown back.
Right.
In 67, invade again, thrown back.
Right.
73, thrown back.
Yes.
Same thing. Now what are they doing? Backdoor, all over.
And
Iran, it's got Hamas. Iran's got Hezbollah, and that's how they operate. Proxy
United
wars, like you were saying.
Proxy wars, and we were involved in those proxy wars because
Yeah, we're
they
still
were
involved,
they were unmarked aircraft that landed in the Azores. I know somebody who was flying them, and they're flying in supplies to them,
To who?
to the Israelis.
From the Azores.
Well, they were flying them from the United States. They landed to fuel.
Okay, that's about halfway.
So we were involved in those things as
Yeah.
well.
Wow.
And everybody.
73 wouldn't have turned out the way it did unless Nixon sent him over some spare parts.
Right.
Because they would have lost.
Yeah.
If at the last minute Nixon didn't do that,
Right.
there would be no more Israel. now.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so these things are going on. It is proxy war. And I think what Americans have to decide is, what is it that we're doing? Why are we involved in these different battles? I mean, I think we have to take more of a view of that. It's not just about, let's put it this way, is it just about our preserving our freedom, or is it about preserving access to strategic resources that the United States wants and they're going to get? What is it, and how do we wind up living in a world where, if that's the case, there's going to be a real confrontation between China and the other large economic powers, whether we like it or we don't like it. I hope that that's not the case. But China is also looking for the same natural resources that we are looking for.
I like Hugh Hewitt. I
know?
like to listen to him because he has guests on, very interesting guests. Like his former Israeli ambassador to the United States is Michael Oren, and he's a very frequent guest. And then there's this admiral, whose name I can't remember, Greek name, an American admiral, and he was on this morning when I was coming in. Speaking of China and resources, he was looking at this. Russia just opened up a huge natural gas pipeline.
Yes, to
Siberia.
to Beijing,
Yes,
right?
to Beijing.
Yes.
But then he said, if you look at Siberia, just to the north of China, and it's full of oil and natural gas, which China lacks, and it's full of rare earths
Yes.
and water.
Yes. Lots of water.
And so, not to mention trees. And
Right.
he said arable land, especially if global warming is what,
Sure.
it comes to fruition and so forth. And so this admiral who worked, I think he was involved with NATO as well at one point in his career, extensively, said, if I were Russians, I'd be a little wary of what China's possible designs on Siberia.
Yeah, it's going to.
15 million people, area the size of the continental United States.
Oh yeah, I know. And this is why we have to figure this stuff out, because otherwise it is going to be with a real confrontation. And the Chinese have been very, very smart. And they have gone in and built railroads into the interior in Brazil. They build port facilities, a lot of different places, including Pakistan. They're building economic infrastructure because they know in order to feed an economy that can support enough of 1.2 or 3 billion people to keep from having political unrest, that they're going to have these resources. But the United States has to as well, and so does Western Europe and Japan.
Everyone
and so
does.
this is where, this is one of the reasons I'm for a rules-based trading system, because we've got to figure this out by a rules-based system versus by confrontation
When you
militarily.
say that, do you mean global rules?
Well, no,
we Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Oh, I
kind of
was a
rules?
supporter of the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
For the reasons that you're describing now.
That's a lot of it. And also, when you're a small business, you've got to have some sort of rules-based system, because you're not big enough to go over.
You're a small business, but you have markets overseas.
Yeah.
That's what kind of small business you're talking about.
Oh, I'm talking about, yes.
Not Rosie Store and.
Not Rosie Store.
Okay.
No, but small business.
Okay.
And small business is so tied into our national security, because, the reason they created the SBA back in 1953 was it was a recommendation of
Small
the
Business Administration where Jim worked.
Yep, and it was the Department of Defense that made that recommendation. They viewed large business getting larger, and they said it was small business that brought the innovation that helped us win the war. We couldn't have won the war without small guys. And they said, so we need to do something that helps make sure they don't go away. And so that still is the case. It's, small guys are bringing almost 60% of the patents that are issued in the United States come from small guys.
Guys in their garages.
Guys in their garages who have got a dream.
And that's America's strength, isn't it?
And that's America's strength. It is America's strength.
It has been during our entire lifetime.
It has been.
And before, right from the earlier than that. And it's why we broke away. It's just so
People
many
with a
things
dream.
going on. You were talking about small business and being able to adapt and that reminds me, I gave you a name and a link a few weeks ago from Victor Hansen, who was a military historian, classicist, also researcher at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. And he said that you said the Pentagon was interested in small business.
Yes, that's correct. Department
of
Defense.
We want to preserve that innovative thinking on the part of small people. And that Hansen looks at that as the Western way of war. And he said the first to develop that thinking on the fly and adapting to changing situations militarily were the Greeks, and especially under Alexander the Great.
Yes.
He could go into Persia and he could defeat armies much larger than him, even though his battle plan, he had to throw out after the first hour.
Right.
And he would adapt, and the Persians couldn't do it, and not like he could. And that's how he was able to just conquer everything because of this innovation, this idea, which originated there. And the best epitome of it now has been, at least in the last couple of centuries, would be in the United States. And he offers lots of examples for that, like the Battle of Midway, which he compares to various other sea battles in, where the Greeks were involved, or where the Venetians were involved. And it's fascinating to see him, just that concept that you were alluding to earlier, and that the military recognizes the value of that.
Oh, the U.S. military really has understood that, and it is. I don't know what happens as we get further and further away from a citizens military, where the draft has not been around for 40 plus years now. Right. Because the average American citizen, when they run into something that's not working, they don't wait around. They go, we're not doing this anymore.
Right, exactly,
and
right.
It happened at Normandy. It happened a lot of places.
Yeah.
And it happened where my dad was at Guadalcanal with the Marines. They decided, no, we're not taking this pounding like this anymore. We're going to do something different.
Yeah.
And so
they could persuade their junior officers and maybe up to the colonel's level to, and then there's going to be a mutiny if we keep doing this. So,
and it's not top driven down.
Right.
Essentially, it was, and it goes back to Eisenhower, and Eisenhower's a great quote. Of course, the generals have always said the battle plan goes out the window after the first bullet's fired, and but Eisenhower said, you can just imagine the planning that went into and had to go into Normandy invasion. It was extensive.
My father was involved with that. He was on a GE going across the channel.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it took a lot of planning. And what Eisenhower said was, it's not the plan that's important, it's the planning that's important.
Good one.
And it's a good one. That. It's a good one to remember. And you know what? He wanted everyone from a general to a private to remember one thing. He wanted them to remember that if you get separated in the confusion from your unit, then your order is you go to the high ground and hold it until the rest of them get there. That was what he wanted everyone to remember in the final analysis. All this planning, which got people to hear, he knew there was going to be a lot of confusion.
Yeah, and, circuitous ways of getting there.
You get to the high ground and hold it until the rest get there.
Interesting concept.
So yeah, I think that's right. I think, and small business. So the way I viewed it for a long time, that the world would be more peaceful and more prosperous if there was more trade going on between small business people. For where we started off, the reason that we started off, trust. Because you build trust, you get to know their families, and it becomes mutually beneficial because you don't want the person you're doing business with to come out on the short end of the stick. You know that doesn't work.
Yep.
That you both have to do well to make a positive relationship. And I do think that the average American person has to realize that individual initiative is really important, and we all need individual initiative. But we all need each other in the end, too. We can't build $1 billion company with just ourselves. That's not going to happen. We can't build a community with just ourselves. We have to do it comes from the concept I picked up from the Marine Corps, which was that
were you drafted or did you join?
No, I joined.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
And which was that if you that we would all do the best we could, but in the end, nobody'd get left behind. And that was the thinking. We were all going. Some people might be awarded a Medal of Honor or a Silver Star or whatever. Some people just do their job. just do their job. That's what they really needed, was just people doing their job. And but in the end, when the time came around, everybody, if we were moving, everybody was moving, dead or alive. And I think that's still, we didn't build barns by ourselves. We
Think about
had
what
barn
happened
raisings.
on that plane that was hijacked.
Yeah.
And the passengers, they were Americans.
They
and
were.
They rallied, and they said they figured out what was going on because of communications back home.
Yep.
And they said, okay, let's roll.
Yep.
And that's what they did.
I get it.
Beautiful, beautiful example, isn't it?
It's a
Of this
beautiful
spirit.
example.
This is just this is what we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about. But they
Yeah.
all did it.
They all did it. That's right.
That's the key. They all did it.
Makes you proud.
Yeah, it does. It is how we have to see it. As they said during the Revolution, either we all hang together or we'll all hang separately.
Was that Franklin?
I think it was Patrick Henry, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it was the right
It is.
idea.
Yeah, yeah.
And as you probably already know, in the end, when they tried to work out, they tried to get after Boston and Bunker Hill and New York, they tried to offer up a pardon for the soldiers who had risen up against the king. And they offered a pardon. The House offered it on behalf of the king, but the House knew there were people that were not going to get a pardon no matter what, and those were the people who signed the Declaration. Everyone else could get a pardon, but the people who signed the Declaration weren't. So,
Yeah, when they penned their name, and Hancock, doing it large.
Yes.
In your face. We're
Yeah.
doing it. We got a lot to lose. Hancock
lot
was
to
a very
lose.
prosperous trader.
a merchant.
Yeah, he was.
He was.
Did a lot of business here in Maine too.
Oh yes, he did. Hey, he signed the charter for Freiburg Academy.
John Hancock did?
So he was governor of Massachusetts,
didn't
and
know.
he signed the
Okay.
charter, which allowed them and gave them the land grants.
1763
1792.
was the academy was formed. But
Yeah.
when you grant a township, what they said, you gotta set up mills, various
Oh,
mill
I
privileges.
see.
You gotta have a minister,
Yeah.
and you gotta have some
Yes.
educational system
Yes,
as well.
that's
So
right.
it probably came earlier. The mandate for it
The mandate
came to
probably.
fruition in
But
1792.
he did sign they've got the incorporation paper.
That's
And
cool.
because the president of Harvard College, who was his friend, was Samuel Langdon Brooke, and he was the president of Harvard College, and he had been the chaplain for the Continental Army. Actually started at Bunker Hill, and went all the way through, and then his son and 6 other Revolutionary soldiers, Caleb Swan of Swan's Falls and so forth, they had all been Harvard graduates and had all been involved in the Revolution.
I was walking through the cemetery in Freiburg, the old village cemetery, behind the old Registry of Deeds where
Yes.
Daniel Webster worked. And
Yes.
So I recognized a lot of, the names from this time that we're speaking of. And there were, what I didn't notice before was that there were lots of Websters in there.
Oh yes.
So did Daniel Webster have family in
I
Freiburg?
I don't know. So I really know the answer to that. He didn't personally have a lineage, I don't believe, there, because he had just graduated from Dartmouth when he came to be
Freiburg
the
Academy.
headmaster at Freiburg.
So did he come there because, well, partly at least because, there's a lot of...
He knew...
the dates, though, so he would, but the dates coincided with his time.
Well, there could well have been,
on the headstones, I mean. And
people who came.
There's 6 or 8 of them out there.
I know. There are still Websters around in East Conway.
Right,
and,
there are, yeah.
Yeah.
I had Mark Webster. I had in 5th grade.
Yeah, there are a number of them. So yeah, it's interesting.
It is interesting.
It is interesting. So we need to stick together. That's my view.
We're here. When I invited Jim to come on here, I said this isn't going to be confrontational kind of thing. It's
Right.
I am a conservative, you're left of center, and I said, we'll get along. We'll get along, and you said, we have to. We have to get along. And we do.
We do.
We're both concerned about this polarization in our country, and a lot of it is on left-right polar opposites, and that's too bad, because it doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't have to.
And next time you're on,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I almost brought it up today, is because it's a dynamic thing and a fluid thing now, especially lately. What is the left? And what is the right? And what are
Yeah.
the issues that
I would
are
love
on
to
the
do
left?
that.
And okay, good.
I think that would be a great discussion.
I agree.
Because, I see myself as a Burkean liberal, or a traditional liberal, if you, depending on how you want to
He said
define
we
it.
only had a minute, so we're going
Yeah.
to.
Oh,
But I'm glad you're interested in
I'm
doing
interested
that.
in that discussion.
And it'll probably take up the whole show.
Yeah, that
so
would be
let's
okay.
prepare a little bit.
Yeah, I'll prepare.
I will too.
I'm
We'll
be
compare notes.
I'm going to be laid up for a while.
Yeah, you
so,
are. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Oh yeah,
You
no.
wanna say
This happens in life.
It does.
So-
It does. We're both going to be. I may not be here either.
I
got issues
also
too.
heard about that too,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah. So hey, listen, while we're laid up,
Yeah.
we can do some research.
Could I? Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always have some books with me in the
Oh, I do
hospital.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
when I'm off of the opioids, then I can read. Before
Yes.
that, I can only watch television.
I
can't-
understand.
Can't focus.
Well, I have the complete works of Edmund
Edmund
Burke.
Burke, bring a few volumes with you.
I'll bring them.
We got to wrap it up.
Yep.
It's been a pleasure, Jim. Thank you
It's
for
always
coming.
a pleasure.
It is.
Yep.
I
Good
enjoy
luck
this.
with you.
Thank you, and you as well. So
Thank you.
we'll stay in touch while we're
We'll
laid
do
up.
that.
Okay.
All right.
Bye, folks. See you in a couple of weeks.